Here are some mind-blowing revelations about the 2024 F1 cars that amazed everyone. From wild innovations to controversial designs, the excitement is through the roof. Today, we're diving deep into the most outrageous features unveiled by the teams. Whether it's Red Bull's controversial Mercedes-inspired concept or other teams pushing the boundaries of legality, there's so much to unpack. So, let's dive into this video to know the craziest innovations that are set to shake up the 2024 F1 season. In the previous Formula One season, Red Bull was the champion team. Their car, called the RB19, was good. People say it was the best car ever in Formula One. Max Verstappen, the driver for Red Bull, drove amazingly with it. He had the best season ever in Formula One history. Verstappen won a lot of races. He broke a record set by Alberto Ascari in 1952. Verstappen won 19 out of 22 races, which is 86.36% of them. That's a big deal. New season, new car. You might think Red Bull wouldn't change much for the next season since they did so well. But that's not how winning teams think. Red Bull is starting the 2024 season with a brand new car. They've changed a lot from the RB19. One noticeable change is in the design of the car. Last year the car had what people call an underbite design, but now they've changed to an overbite design. It's different from what other teams are doing too. It seems like everyone's copying what Red Bull did last year, but it's a big extension that goes all the way to the front of the cockpit. This extension creates a surface on top of the side pod. Below it, there's a space where air comes in. It's designed with a big curve underneath. When Red Bull first showed pictures and videos of the new car, it looked like there wasn't an inlet for the side pod. But there is one, it's just hidden. It's a thin strip that sits under the overbite and goes all the way down to the edge of the floor. This new design is pretty wild. It's inspired by something Mercedes tried before, called the zero pod design. People made fun of that design for a long time before Mercedes gave up on it. But Red Bull's design isn't the same, it just borrows some ideas from it. In 2023, Red Bull had these wide side pod inlets. Underneath them was a big gap between the side pod and the floor. They called it an undercut. Now, Red Bull is doing something different. They're taking an idea from Mercedes called the zero pod inlet. It's a thin vertical inlet that hugs the cockpit. Red Bull is combining this idea with their undercut side pod. It's a mix of the two and something new for Formula One. A new aerodynamic philosophy. This new design is different from Mercedes' old zero pod and Red Bull's design in the past 2 years. Technology has improved, especially radiator technology. Now, radiators can be smaller but still work well. This gives Red Bull more freedom in designing the car's aerodynamics. They can make the shape they want without worrying too much about cooling the engine. So, they've made their undercut bigger because they don't need as much space for the radiators in the side pod. Red Bull's changes aim to improve how air flows at the back of the car. This helps with something called ground effect, which is important in the current rules of Formula One. Red Bull must be sure about these changes to make such a big switch from last season's design. This confidence is worrying for other teams on the grid. Mercedes joins the innovation. Mercedes also made some clever design changes. They focused on the front wing, specifically the upper part. Instead of having one solid piece, they split it into two segments. The upper part starts as a thin tube of carbon fiber. About a third of the way along, it turns into a more typical wing shape. They did this by removing part of the top section of the wing. Mercedes has made a clever move by creating a gap in the front wing. This lets air flow through it. This airflow could go to different places. It might go under the front floor or the side pods. Either way, it helps create downforce at the back of the car instead of relying too much on the front wing. This should fix Mercedes' balance issues for the past 2 years. The rest of the front wing looks more like a traditional wing now, unlike the tube-like design they had before. This change shows that Mercedes is back to being innovative and finding new ways to make their car faster, but as we saw with the zero pods, not every solution works perfectly. Mercedes has also changed the layout of the main plane and nose. The nose is now shorter than before. It's placed on the second element of the front wing, not right at the front of the main plane anymore. Innovative airflow control. Mercedes has made an interesting design change by adding a spoon-like scoop on the main plane in front of the nose. This design is meant to control the airflow under the car. In terms of the rules, Mercedes wouldn't have added it unless they were confident it was legal. However, they are pushing the boundaries. According to Regulation 3.9.1, each wing element must cover the rear edge of the element below it when viewed from above. While the top wing element doesn't need covering, the inside third of Mercedes' top wing element seems to cover the rear edge of the element below. This suggests that they are meeting the rules, but it's a close call. Whether Mercedes' new design will be legal is still uncertain. It has to pass the FIA's load tests and potentially face complaints from other teams who tend to raise concerns about innovations. If it clears both hurdles, Mercedes can keep it. Last season, Mercedes used a pull rod rear suspension on their W14 car. However, they switched to a push rod setup during the winter break this year. This change aligns them with other teams like Aston Martin, Red Bull, Alpine, Sauber, McLaren and Williams, who also use push rod setups. While this switch isn't too surprising given the well-known advantages of the rear suspension setup favored by Red Bull, it's notable that Ferrari chose not to follow suit. Ferrari's different approach. Instead of adopting the push rod setup like most other teams, Ferrari focused on innovating their pull rod design for their 2024 car. Ferrari's technical director, Enrico Cardal, revealed that the team tested the pushrod concept for several years, but ultimately found their modified pull rod setup to be better for the overall aerodynamic profile of the car. For the 2024 season, Ferrari has introduced an innovative version of the rear suspension. This design places the inboard parts inside the gearbox. Speaking to the media, Ferrari's technical director explained that they had tested a pushrod suspension for a couple of years. The main difference from last year's car is in the rear, where the inboard suspension is now positioned inside the gearbox. This change represents a new concept for Ferrari and is seen as an innovation because it alters how they manage the inboard suspension compared to previous designs. The location of the inboard suspension parts significantly impacts the performance of the suspension system and the car's center of gravity. Placing these parts inside the gearbox may present challenges for the trackside engineers during race weekends. However, any difficulties encountered are deemed worthwhile if they provide an advantage in on-track performance. Ultimately, what matters most is gaining an advantage in performance, regardless of the challenges faced. McLaren's strategic approach. McLaren also has exciting developments planned for the new season. However, they've chosen to be more conservative in revealing their car. They've kept a lot hidden before pre-season testing. Andrea Stella, the team principal, mentioned in press release quotes that while there are innovations on the car, not all areas they want to address have been completed for the launch spec car. These areas will be the focus of their in-season development, which is already underway. Stella didn't provide specific details, but a close look at the new MCL38 photos suggests McLaren is going to great lengths to keep certain areas secret. In particular, they've edited the floor edge shown in the photos to conceal some details. This suggests McLaren is keeping some innovations closely guarded. The prospect of pre-season testing starting on the 21st brings a wave of excitement, especially considering the innovations being kept under wraps by teams like McLaren. As one of the 5 teams with a genuine shot at race wins this season, any secret innovation they harbor adds to the anticipation. Witnessing such significant innovation in the 3rd year of a regulation cycle is particularly thrilling. It makes me eager to see how these changes will translate into performance on the track. So, what do you think of the innovations in F1 in 2024? Who do you think will emerge as the strongest contender? Comment below and subscribe for more.